Are you thinking about buying a second home in the North Carolina high country? Before you go fall in love with those views, let's talk about the real all-in costs so you don't have any surprises after closing. So if you're thinking about buying a second home in the mountains, maybe you're looking to split time or retire soon and you want that place with the views, we're going to talk about your recurring costs, some one-time costs. We'll even do some simple math as it relates to short-term rentals if you're thinking about it from an investment perspective. And we're going to talk about some things, hopefully, that will help those gotcha moments.
Hot, gotcha.
Or help you avoid, I should say, those gotcha moments with unexpected surprises. All right, so let's start with one-time expenses. And that's going to cover everything from, let's say, your down payment if you're financing. So you're going to have somewhere between 15 to 25, even 30%. It's really going to depend on a few things. Your profile as a borrower, the lender, the product that you're using, and potentially even the type of home that you're purchasing. So all of that's going to go into the mix to determine what the requirements are for the product that you're going to use. The second thing might be closing costs. And there's going to be a handful. North Carolina is a lawyer state, so you're going to have an attorney that's involved with the closing. You're going to have your prepaids, taxes. You're going to have your first year of insurance is going to be due at closing. You could have, if you're in an HOA type community or a POA, you could have fees that are going to get prorated depending on the closing date. But then you also have things like your recording fees, title fees, doc stamps, all that kind of stuff that goes into it. So those are all part of the one-time expenses. Some of the other one-time expenses, not so much at closing, but leading up to that, are going to be inspections. And there's a lot to choose from. It doesn't really matter where in the country you're buying or even buying from. So you're going to, of course, want to start with a general. You're likely going to want to do a WDO, which is wood and destroying organisms. You've got chimney and flue inspections. You've got septic and well, depending on the type of property that you're looking at. There are a lot. You could have air quality. You probably might want to do radon. It's very common in the high country to have radon. So these are all the different things that you might want to be looking for as you get closer to narrowing down, and especially once you go under contract. These are conversations we'll talk through in terms of what are the right inspections for the property and for you, frankly. Some of the other one-time expenses that really are going to be property specific, and depending on the type of property you're purchasing, it's going to be things like, is there specific furniture you need, or do you need window treatments? You're probably going to have to start up your Wi-Fi and all the different utilities. You definitely have to start those up. Wi-Fi is probably optional, but you might want smart cameras. You might want video doorbells. You might want to have, if it's a gravel driveway, does the gravel need any touch-up or new grading? There could be a fair amount that goes into some of those one-time expenses as you're closing on the property. All right, so now let's talk about some of the recurring costs that you might incur. And the first thing is going to be your mortgage if you're financing. And again, that's a very specific conversation you're going to have with the lender. It's going to depend on the purchase price of your property, how much you're going to put down. That's really not something that I can fully speak to without knowing the property that you're looking at. But then you're also going to have insurance. And depending on the type of property and how you plan to use it, if rental is a consideration, there's different types of insurance programs and products that you're probably going to want to consider. The next recurring cost that I'm sure you're aware of is going to be your taxes. So you're going to have your property taxes, which are going to be by the county, and in some cases, the individual town that you live within might also have taxes. So you want to know effectively what your taxes are going to be before you fully commit and have an understanding of what that estimate's going to be. All right, let's talk about utilities. And although there's startup costs to initiate those services, of course, they're recurring as well. You've got power. You're going to have water and sewer, or maybe it's septic and well, depending on the property that you're looking at. If it is septic, you want to have it pumped periodically. There might be a program you want to put it on there. You got to think about internet. What options are available to you, and then what do those prices look like? Does it include cable, or how are you going to do that? Maybe you want to do everything over the internet. There could be things like trash service. In many cases, it's covered by the town, but in other cases, it's not. So are you going to have, someone pick up trash for you, private service? Cleaning. Do you want somebody cleaning the property? There's a lot that can go into, just the carrying costs, and you want to think through all of them before it's too late. Then there are some considerations as it relates to season. So of course, in the wintertime, you're going to potentially want to have snow removal. And is it going to be per push, as an example, like you kind of call them on demand, or do you have a seasonal contract, as an example? You've got things like pest service. Do you want to have somebody that comes out and sprays for pests? And those typically Usually include a monthly or a quarterly, depending on the type of program that you have. So then you have like driveway upkeep. It could be culverts, it could be gravel. There's some different things you're going to want to be thinking about. In many POAs, if you have a fireplace, they're going to require like a once a year chimney inspection, just to make sure that everything's working the way that it should and that there's no real risk of a buildup or a fire occurring in your particular. Additionally, you might want to have your HVAC system service. You might want to have your chimney swept. These are all things that just, kind of have to happen. And then, of course, if you're in some sort of a community, you might have an HOA, a COA, a POA. Basically, the first letter doesn't matter, but it's an owners association, and everyone's going to share a certain amount of cost for the common areas across all the different units in that particular neighborhood. But this is one of those gotcha moments. So if you are in one of those communities, we want to fully understand all the services that are offered as part of those fees. Because what you don't want to do is set up for snow removal and find out that, the common areas are already covered by that service. All right, so now let's talk about the short-term rental and how you use them, the math that goes along with that. The first thing you want to consider is the usage pattern. Are you going to rent for leaf season in the wintertime, for summer getaways? Are you going to use the property, some combination of those different seasons? All of that has to be factored in as you're thinking about how much are you going to generate top line, and then we got to figure out bottom line, more importantly for you as well. All right, so when we think about the top line, we got to figure out what the rate is. And more importantly, are you going to use someone to manage the property where they'll do all that for you? Or are you going to manage it yourself and then you're going to coordinate or even come up with your pricing strategy for peak periods of time and demand weekends? Are you going to account for the woolly worm, as an example, up in Beach and Sugar? All of that kind of has to go into the model when you're thinking about it. Of course, if you're using the help of a property manager rental company, they've got a lot of that in this, that they've already have it in place in their system, I should say. And as you're interviewing these companies, if you are going to go that route, you got to figure out things like the cleaning fee. Is it a pass-through? Does it get added on? How much is it? There's a huge variation. If you've ever looked yourself to book an Airbnb, you're going to see even between the platforms, VRBO will show a price, Airbnb will show a price, same exact property. Platform has a fee, the cleaning fees can be different. There's a lot of different fees associated with it. You want to understand how those all stack together and how it makes your property more or less competitive. And in addition to your taxes as the owner of the property, there are taxes when you use a short-term rental. So how are those collected? Who remits them? These are questions you're probably going to want to know the answers to. So if you're using a company, make sure they have the ability to remit on your behalf. It takes a huge headache out of the bookkeeping and ensures that you're going to be in compliance. And speaking of compliance, most of the towns in the high country have a lot of rental restrictions. Many of them don't, but the ones that don't often have other requirements, or even the ones that do have the same requirements, where you're going to have to fill out an annual survey, and you're going to have to say, yes, I have a fire extinguisher. Yes, I have a carbon monoxide detector. Yes, I have a phone that is a landline, so that in the event all the other services are down, the person renting has the ability to make contact in the case of emergency. Then there's the stuff that you can't really measure. It's the wear and tear. So you kind of want to have an allowance if you're going to rent for things that are going to break. Because the truth is, stuff's going to happen. Things are going to break. And it's not always going to be covered by the accidental insurance if they even elect to take that. So it is a consideration that you really have to think about if you're going to open your property up for short-term rental. So then it really comes down to just the sanity check. Like, does this make sense? What's the break even? What is the ROI? And that math is going to be different for everybody because depending on your recurring costs, more so than your one-time costs, it may make more sense than others. But I will tell you, because of COVID, there is a lot of availability of rentals in and throughout the high country. So this is something where you're going to want to figure out, do you want to have an owner's closet where you can lock things away when people are using, your potential property, or are you going to rent it all? These are when we can help navigate that because we've done it both ways. Okay, so what are some of those gotchas? What are the things that you really want to avoid? Well, honestly, long, steep driveways, those are tough in the wintertime. So what if your cleaner can't get to the property? What's the ripple effect in the event that you actually have that listed as a rental and people are arriving? And maybe they've got a great four-wheel drive vehicle, but the cleaning service, they've got all-wheel drive, or maybe it's just not adequate to clear and get to the property that you have. So that's something you're going to want to think about. As you're thinking about properties, you're also going to want to think about permitting and water, and if you're on a well or septic, what are the capacities of those systems? They are rated and built for a certain size. Has someone added on to that property? Has the septic potentially been improved to allow for the added capacity? Or Are there areas that have become sleeping areas that were originally not part of the design, as they've moved more towards short-term rental? These are the things you're going to be, that you want to be watching for. And then if you are renting, you just have to be aware of what are the short-term rental restrictions and can they change? Because things get voted on all the time. I can assure you the locals do not like short-term rentals. They do not like a revolving door in their neighborhood. And, things do change. So you just have to be kind of eyes wide open as you make a purchasing decision if that is part of the equation. And what about insurance? they're going to account for if you have a wood burning fireplace, if you have a wood stove, if you've got probably a hot tub, all of these can add a little bit of risk. Something you might not think of is how close are you to the closest fire hydrant? Are there fire hydrants? There are communities in the high country, very nice communities, that don't have fire hydrants. These are the kind of things that are going to affect, so you're going to want to get insurance quotes early in the purchase process. All right, and then the other thing you might want to consider is the internet and dead zones, whether it be cell phone, Wi-Fi, whatever. Starlink is a great backup plan for most owners, especially on the mountains that can be a little more remote. But you have to have a view of the sky. It gets better every iteration. I think they're up to the 3rd generation now of some of those Starlink satellites. They're faster, they have more capacity, they have better latency speeds. So every time it gets better, but if you can't see the sky, or you can only see it seasonally, that can have an impact. All right, so trying to put a bow on this and thinking about all the things that you're gonna incur. Of course, you're going to have principal and interest if you're using financing. You're going to have insurance. You're going to have services. And actually with insurance, you might have a short-term rental rider, again, depending on how you use the property. You're going to have services. Could be HVAC, could be lawn, could be chimney, etc. You're going to have, of course, all of your utilities. And then you're going to think about HOA, POA, any types of those fees that are going to be added on. And then you also want to think about reserves. You have to plan for the unexpected. The weather can be extreme in the high country. You could have a frozen pipe even with your water turned off. There's things that you just want to be prepared for, and having a small kind of emergency fund or a reserve fund is a really good strategy as it relates to second home properties, just as a whole. All right, so here's a few things as part of a checklist you might want to think about. Confirm the road maintenance and or snow removal plan. Who does it? How much is it? How often is it done? You might want to do an internet speed test. I know that sounds silly, but it's certainly something to consider. You're going to want to pull short-term rental restrictions, ordinances, maybe the HOA. You want to know what all of their fees are, what's included, and then also any restrictions that they might have. You want to get insurance early, and you want to be, fully informed. So if you are considering rentals, make sure you get including the STR, the short-term rental rider. And then you might want to have tests done for certain things like well and septic, depending on the property, radon, wood destroying organisms. This is kind of a harsher environment. And again, you want to be eyes wide open as you're considering buying a property. And hey, pro tip, if you happen to be here in the winter, even though the buying opportunities can be better, more negotiating power, all the things I've talked about before, walk the driveway, drive out there, see what it looks like, talk to the neighbors. Do it anytime, but especially in the wintertime when the conditions can be a little more extreme. All right, so now it's my favor to ask of you, please hit the like button, subscribe, be informed, share these videos with people that you might know that are interested in buying in the high country. And honestly, if you're considering short-term rental, reach out to us. We have connections with people that manage these properties, both companies and even smaller kind of boutique type individuals. We'll make an introduction. They can start to figure out what the pro forma might look like. Does it make sense? And if you're just more broadly thinking about buying a place in the high country, reach out to us. We're on social media. You can put a comment here. You can always email us. It's at the bottom of the video. We'd love to find out what questions you have. We'll try to answer them as best we can and help you live joy in the high country.